Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Welcome to today's webinar, Global UDI Updates, Navigating UDAMED Changes and Health Authority Trends. I'm Vernon Baker. I'll be your moderator for today's session. I'm a senior medical device guru at Greenlight Guru. Just a word about us, Greenlight. Our mission is to improve the quality of life through our work in the medtech industry. It's probably a shared goal with many of you that are here today. And we host these sort of free webinars to share valuable insights, like from our expert speaker today, to learn from top industry experts, and to showcase our industry-leading solutions. So our software is designed to help medtech companies bring their life-changing products to patients faster, more efficiently, and with less risk. So our MedTech suite includes software solutions for product development, quality management, clinical data management that are all specifically tailored for the medical device industry. So you can join our 1,100 leading MedTech companies that trust Greenlight Guru. You can visit greenlight.guru for a personalized demo if you'd like after today's webinar. So that's a little bit about us. Welcome everyone again. Now just two housekeeping items before we dive into our feature presentation here. The first is that we invite you to actively participate. Please use the chat tab. See, many of you are already making use of it, so you've found that. It's to the right. You can connect with fellow attendees. You can also use the Q&A tab to ask questions. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end, so you can pop your questions into the Q&A tab. I'll take a look at that and pose the questions to John at the end, and I'll tend to focus on the most upvoted or thumbs up questions that are relevant for our discussion. So if you don't want to ask your own question, you can also thumbs up the questions that are there. That's item one. Second, we will be sending out the full recording and the presentation slides to all registrants after the live event. We are sending all of those. That always is a question that gets asked, so you can watch your inbox for the follow-up email. May take just a little time there, but we'll get it to you. So with no further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's expert presenter, John Lawrence. He directs electronic submission and regulatory requirement initiatives that impact the medical device industry. He has advanced experience with machine-to-machine submission requirements to global UDI databases. So that includes the US FDA GUDID, GUDID, EU UDAMED, China NMPA, and South Korea IMDIS, and part of the pilot for Australia, AUS UDID. So John represents ReadTech in membership with MedTech Europe, and he actively participates in electronic submission pilots to regulator UDI databases. So he is an expert on UDI data submission databases. So I'm eager to learn from him here today, and I hope you are too. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, John, for today's presentation.
All right. Thank you very much, and thank you, Greenlight Guru, for having me here today. I'm always excited to talk about UDI, especially from a global perspective. What I wanted to start off with is an update on the UDAMED rollout. So you'll be aware that there was activity towards the end of last year where the EU Commission publicized a roadmap of the completion of UDAMED, which was suggesting that we were going to see yet another delay of several years until UDAMED would be fully functional and they could operationalize it for all modules aligning with the MDR, IVDR. However, there's clearly a lot of pushback about even a longer delay. So the Commission has some updated plans on how they will be rolling out the mandates of the modules. So I'm going to spend a good amount of time on that, on what that is, and also now that clearly the MDR date has passed, how do we strategize next steps? We'll kind of tie that into where UDAMED is in the current point in time, like what you can do now so that you're not, rushing last minute to get things done with your submissions to the Commission. Once we finish all the conversation on UDAMED, I will touch on other health authority activities. So some of the ones that were just mentioned in the intro work with China, South Korea, U.S. And recently we're involved on the technical working group for Australia with the build out of their. And this is going to be a new one now. AusUDID is what they're calling it. So yes, so yeah, that's the name of that particular database, and some other things that are upcoming. Lastly, just sort of touch on some updated services to where we play within this space and how we help companies, meet these or comply with these new initiatives with respect to the submission and other changes that it could have to your organization and processes. So without further ado, kicking off with EU MDR, IVDR, this legislative amendment has been approved, the one I was referring to, where essentially, if you think about it, if anyone, if you're familiar with either, agile software development or any type of agile practices, you want to release incrementally when there's value, right? As opposed to taking on more of a grand waterfall method where everything has to be done and perfect before you release your first iteration of something. So what the commission was originally doing with UDAMED rollout was essentially every single module of the 6 modules of the system had to be developed, tested, completed, gone through the audit before they could mandate any usage of it, or really have adoption of usage of the system. And that's what was challenged when the delays were being seen to be forthcoming towards the end of last year. That the pushback was, there's modules that are done. Can't we start rolling some of these out and getting value within industry while waiting on the commission to complete development of some of the other modules? So let's talk a little bit about what that means. So I have, here is there's a link here, and this will be active in the slides to the MDR IVDR amendment with the transition and the EU UDAMED rollout. So this will be accessible to everyone if you've not seen this yet. We'll get into some of the details. There's all types of materials that were released with that, Q&A, press release, fact sheet. But still, if I was trying to figure out what does this mean to me? What do I have to do? There is an IVD transition, which you can see here on the screen, extending the date to place legacy IVD devices on the market to avoid shortages. The rollout that they will be performing, as I was alluding to, is going to be requiring earlier mandatory use. Their initial wording was about early as Q4 2025, but something I want to share with you all today in a few slides now and spend some time on will be the latest and greatest information we received from the Commission as part of the Medical Device Coordination Group meeting that was held a few weeks ago with the UDAMED Working Group. We're members of the MedTech Europe UDAMED Working Group and IT Experts Group, so we're constantly plugged in and involved with the happenings with preparing industry for UDAMED, but then we also received some updates from the particular Medical Device Coordination Group meeting that they're giving an updated point of view as how they see this UDAMED rollout happening. So I'll get into those details. Let's see here, UDAMED modules are finalized. Decreasing a UDI registration period. This was something that I don't know if everyone had picked up on when this, when they're rolling out this amendment and new transition of implementing UDAMED. Previously, there was this 18-month period of time that you could say you had to really register your devices via UDI submission within UDAMED once UDAMED was fully functional and deemed fit for use. However, that is shrinking now with the new rollout approach, which ultimately gives organizations really roughly 6 months from the time that they mandate the usage of the UDI module to when everything really should be registered within the database. There's also a decrease in certificate entry period from 18 to 12 months. So there's certainly some folks that, yes, it's like, okay, we can start getting some value out of it, but some of the other rules are changing. Other rules of the game are changing. So it's essential that your organization is aware of that, prepared for that. If you need help with that, you're able to connect with organizations for some support. But it's an important piece of information there. From a supply notice, they're requiring manufacturers to give a 6-month prior notice to member state and consumers if they foresee any interruption of the supply of their medical devices or IVDs that may result in risk of serious harm. So if with all regulation, implementation changes with UDAMED, if there is any risk of that shortage, they're calling for manufacturers to give that to give a heads up to the member states, of course, and consumers, so a effective mitigation can be identified. This is essentially a graph, and this is from one of my colleagues. We were talking about him a bit before the presentation, where my colleague, Gary Sainer, you may have attended some of his presentations in the past. He does an excellent job and has done an excellent job just staying on top of all of the changes that have come in through ever since the original MDR was published, right? Leading up to when initially there was supposed to be date of application in 2020, but then that got pushed from, the reasoning was due to the pandemic, that, things weren't ready. My perspective, it was just like there was no UDAMED yet. So how could they have implemented it? Because we were on the technical working team and getting access to the test environment as to what it was functional. But anyway, that was delayed the date of application. But then also there's been, several other delays to the availability of the UDAMED system. And as over time, as you see here, there's been some changes to some of in this case, the IVD transition timeline. So this will be here for your reference. Again, there's a lot that could be dig into in this particular topic, and we could cover that offline if that is something of interest to you. Likewise, from the medical device migration timeline for legacy devices, we're seeing this also has been evolving and had to become extended due to some of the delays that were experienced. The commission will point back to technically voluntary registration has been able to be done since October of 2021. What they mean by that is that's when they pushed the device module they made a deployment to production environment of UDAMED, right? So this module was released. It certainly wasn't complete because, for example, the machine-to-machine components. So for manufacturers that are looking to submit to the health authorities in a more electronic fashion, in the US, there's HL7 SPL submissions that you can make to seed into that database. With UDAMED, it's another XML schema that the commission essentially invented. These submissions are made electronically. All that functionality is what has been really taking a long time to get up to speed, but it's critical. So for organizations that think of, if you have thousands and thousands of products, or maybe not so many products, but you're selling into multiple markets, having automation involved in how you're managing your device registration, visibility into that information, all that becomes much more critical than if you took the stance of, I'm just going to create a user account on the UDAMED website and just start keying stuff in, because there is a data entry option. I'll just start keying in and doing my registrations because I only have 10. You could do that as well, but that's really essentially what the commission launched in October of 2021 was the ability to do it via the UI. So there has been activity, there has been devices registered there, but I think we're starting to see it pick up now that the machine-to-machine, the electronic submission flavor of putting data into UDAMED has been evolving over the years, and it's becoming more mature. It's just back when it originally came out, there was not, for example, you could submit perhaps an initial registration machine-to-machine, but then you would have to make any changes manually via the user interface of UDAMED versus being able to, fully satisfy the life cycle of that device data maintenance via machine-to-machine. So all those use cases have been getting further completed over the years, and it's getting a bit more stable. So all the same thing here is what's identified on this timeline is the MDR equivalent submission of a device if you have a legacy device towards the end of the transition period. So that's always been there, but it's just what's been changing is kind of the dates as to when are your deadlines, when's the cutoff of the transition and so forth. So this is the slide that was from the working group meeting a few weeks ago that I referred to in the beginning of this discussion. And this is the latest and greatest look in as to where the commission is, and I'll help kind of translate what some of these things mean, but just didn't want to change the meaning of the intent of what they're looking to communicate here. So again, this is all related to that amendment that supports the gradual rollout of the modules and functionality, meaning really rollout of mandating, for lack of a better word, I would say. So within 2024, which is where we are now, they're anticipating October that the technical team developing UDAMED will deliver the end user full technical documentation for machine to machine. So that's what M2M stands for there. And that's what I was referring to. Like they develop the user interface, again, if you only have a few pieces of information to put in there, that's probably maybe sufficient. But they focus on that first, and then they're kind of trying to build out the machine-to-machine pieces. We have seen great progress on the device module for this, and actually only anticipate a few more changes to that, which we'll be going through the testing periods before they actually fully mandate the device module. It's just the others, for example, vigilance module for submitting manufacturer incident reports to UDAMED as required through the MDR. That's is still quite a work in process. There's been no machine-to-machine specifications shared yet. We do have playground access to the vigilance module where you could play around with user interface and try to upload some reports manually and so forth. But there's clearly work to be done on vigilance, and then also on the SIPS module itself has quite a bit of development left to do. So again, this created the problem of, oh boy, we can't just wait till everything's done again and then perform an audit. Now we're in 2027, 2028 when UDAMED's getting mandated, and that wasn't going to fly. So within the October timeframe, the end of this year, we'll say, okay, they'll have the first 5 modules fully documented from a technical perspective for the use of machine to machine. They then will be performing the audit, or kind of in tandem, right? The audit of the first 5 modules they're going to release. And I'll get into more details on what those modules are, but so yeah, they're quite far along with all the rest of the modules that they feel like they'll have, these 5 done and ready. They're auditing those modules for conformity to the MDR, IVDR. And they expect the results of that audit to go well, and a notification published in the official journal for the European Union for the actor module. So the actor registration, where you get you register your SRNs with the commission. The UDI device module. So this would be for your UDI submissions, device registration, notified body and certificate modules, and also the market surveillance module. That would be also expected to be complete and notified in July of next year of the mandate timing of the usage. There will be the second part of next year, competent authorities, and also want to be a lot of onboarding for the modules declared functional. So this is all based off of what they're declaring functional within the journal. They'll be working through onboarding in preparation for when mandated use will happen. you see down this line here is they're recognizing that they really need to ramp up communication regarding UDAMED itself and also the onboarding activities. For anyone that's done machine-to-machine submissions for UDI or other other submission types, getting that connection set up. I don't mean necessarily the technology, but even if you're using a third party or someone, there's all different types of onboarding steps that you need to be aware of on, how to effectively do that, how to put that into your processes and your quality management system and so forth. So there's been a lot of requests for information, and the commission has been, positive in responding to understanding that more materials, whether they're training webinars, training films, documentation on how that onboarding happens and how, what's going on in the expectation of the system. Finally, in January of 2026, and this is coming from them, not me, they're saying, okay, mandatory use of the actor UDI devices, notified bodies, certificates, and market surveillance. That will go into effect Q1 2026. So that's may sound like a long ways away, since we're in July of 2024 right now. But when it comes to the activities needed to prepare for this, right? So even getting into the playground, which is the test environment that the commission made available, and just understanding how all this stuff works, how the submission process works, whether you're using machine to machine or you're using the user interface. There's a lot of preparation time needing to plan out how you're going to identify your own internal process for submission. Of course, document and validate said process if you're using software to perform machine-to-machine submissions, ensuring that software is maintained in a validated state. All that good fun stuff that's going to come along with this kind of big bang coming in Q1 of 2026. So it seems a little far away, but I just want to caution that it's not. I would say it's not as far as it looks. If it does look far. Perhaps others are going, oh no, that's not far at all. We better, get started. And when it gets very critical, this is when I was speaking earlier about there was this 18-month window previously that you had to perform your submissions, but we see that shrinking down to 6 months for the initial registration now with this updated rollout. Now, the way that could be, I guess you could say, what's significant in why that 6 month, why is that now 6 months that they have, is due to the vigilance. I would say mainly due to the vigilance module becoming mandatory within that 6 month period. So about the end of Q2 2026, they're anticipating that they'll have another publication in the official journal for the EU for the mandated use of the vigilance module. So instead of the gigantic audit for everything and one notice going out to industry that they are, mandating the use of UDAMED, it's now kind of being sliced and diced and separated out as to their following that path for the first 5 modules. And then they will do, lastly, for the vigilance module in the January timeframe. Once that 6 month window hits in July, the devices need to be all registered in UDAMED. That's the end of the transition period. If there's any manufacturer incident reports, as an example, any need to make a submission to the vigilance module, there's a prerequisite that the device has first to be registered in UDAMED. So if you think about that from your product inventory perspective and so forth, where it's like, okay, just, imagine a world in 2026 that starting in January, you can start registering your devices into the system. In July, any, serious incidents have to be reported to the vigilance module into the system. And that vigilance submission will not be accepted unless you have first registered the associated device via the device module. So now it's like, oh, okay, it's different than the US where, not condoning it, but if someone missed the class 3 or class 2 submission deadlines, there were always September 24th of a particular year. If you missed that, there wasn't really like a compelling event that happened that would, impact your organization. The FDA they like to see you're making progress towards it, but it wasn't like they needed all this information in order for this next further downstream process to work properly. So with UDAMED, since everything's integrated here with all these modules, like I said, you won't be able to make that manufacturer incident report submission without first having that device registered. And if you look back at the MDR about the requirements of the manufacturer incident report, you could have some pretty tight deadlines from the time that report has been, or that incident, has been, discovered and communicated, in which you have to make that submission. You have to make that MIR form submission. And if you're not ready for your UDI submission, your UDI registrations at that point, some of these windows, it could be, just a couple of weeks that you have to make this MIR form submission. And that's really going to put things, you don't want to be scrambling for your device registration if you have to go ahead and make that submission. So it's also a reason why we like to emphasize that, take the time that the commission is, giving industry, for lack of a better expression, I guess, to really get ahead of things and, start submitting and feeding out your device information into the UDAMED database, if even playground, if even the test environment, to just be ready, ensure that you are prepared for once these milestones start hitting. With the down here in the bottom part of the screen, just to explain this, since we'll be, sending out the slides and so forth, this is showing the releases that the commission's making to UDAMED, which we have information about what functionality is within each of these packages, but it's essentially the supporting releases to make all of this happen. So like the release 3.8.0 and 3.9, there's going to be things coming out. I would say the most impactful update for the device module, which relates to UDI, is probably going to be the master UDI information. We're expecting to get the specifications on that within the next several months or so from the commission on how that's being implemented within UDAMED. That was like the last major piece that they had to develop for the device module. So those are the releases that will be coming to support these activities. This is our latest plan. So we recognize the fact that this has changed a bit over the years, as I was talking about my colleague Gary having this archive, if you will, of all the different approaches. But the fact that this got an amendment, added to it, it was adopted by Parliament and so forth, that they really need to hit this date, and we feel confident that we will see, if it's not exactly this, perhaps maybe it's just the first 3 modules, because they're not committing which specific modules in like legal documentation. Of course, is more of a working group presentation and of what their thinking is, their current planning. But I would say from a UDI perspective, there's really not much to hold this back, to not, at least in the first wave of these modules, mandate the UDI module in January of 2026. I would say, if anything here, that has the risk to it could be maybe the vigilance might need a little bit more time. And I'm saying that just because we haven't seen technical specifications yet that we're expecting in October. And I'm seeing October, okay, we're going to get specifications in October. They're going to say they're ready in January. So that's giving industry and folks and colleagues of mine on the UDAMED, the technical team and working group for MedTech Europe, that's pretty big challenge of testing, identifying any issues, getting feedback in, and getting that resolved. So perhaps that might see a little bit more, creativity applied to how they implement this. But it's the first three modules are really, really quite mature. Again, if there's any questions about this, I'd be happy to share with what interpretation it is. This was from, like I said, the Medical Device Coordination Group meeting 2 weeks ago. So it's about this is the latest and greatest plan we have that is from the perspective of the commission. Now with that updated timeline, and even prior to it, right, you may have heard, if you're selling product in France or in Ireland, you may have heard that there was some early adoption use where perhaps the member states were asking to have, strongly encouraging manufacturers to use the voluntary UDAMED database. That was that piece I was referring to earlier, where you saw that long tail that was like October of 2021, in which you could have manually keyed stuff in. And since that was functional and in place for a while, some of the member states started saying, we're encouraging you to do this to then, in place of doing your individual, in this example, French national registration. You could do that registration in UDAMED. And some folks have taken advantage of that opportunity. So it's just like another reason as to why are people submitting now to UDAMED? Why are people utilizing it, especially from a device module perspective? Ireland also had their registration requirements. They're requesting organizations to register the economic operator. So that would be like the actor registration component of UDAMED, and the device details within the UDI device module. Also, again, requesting that be used, because if you think about it, the member states have, this is going to make their lives easier, supposed to, the UDAMED system. And they know these components are already completed. They want you to start using them so they can start realizing the benefits, and they're trying to give a kind of a trade-off as to what you would not have to, or what you would no longer have to do if you start using UDAMED early. But this isn't something that's aligned throughout all the member states. And I know there was a lot of concern with the organizations, again, that were looking to use machine to machine, that like, oh boy, am I going to be penalized being an early adopter? If I start submitting now because, France is asking me, but then the commission makes some great change before they've gone through the audit, which is essentially the user acceptance testing of the UDI device module, according to the functional specifications of the MDR. So you'll feel a little uneasy about committing data into production that early. But I do see from my peer review that is evolving a bit now with some of this updated communication from the commission, and just the confidence raising that the UDI module is going to be mandated, certainly by Q1 of 2026. So I would say this group, the early member state adoption group, specifically France, they were also instrumental, I believe, in when that information came out towards the end of last year, where the commission was showing a roadmap of development for 3 more years until they, perform the single audit and implement everything all at once. I think there's perhaps some rumors out there that was almost like a deliberate strategic move to put that public roadmap out there of, wow, look how much longer it's going to be. We're going to have to delay again, to kind of build some momentum to be able to argue and, argue and get approved the, gradual rollout amendment to the MDR. Because, of course, France and Ireland and all the member states were strongly supportive. If that can be mandated, then they can rely on the data they're getting through the module sooner rather than later, versus getting voluntary submissions processed. Belgium, Germany, and Italy, they appear to have that similar mindset. But again, I think with this amendment rolling out, like here, that's a piece of the puzzle that I believe we're going to start hearing about more in the near future. Now that the commission presented their roadmap 2 weeks ago in this medical device coordination group meeting, if you think about it, that meeting has the representatives of France, Ireland, Belgium, all the member states and notified bodies. So they're sharing this information in this kind of like closed door discussion. And now their strategies of how they're utilizing UDAMED will need to get, evolve into alignment with the Commission's updated planning. So I do expect to hear some things out of these member states over the next few months, and just much more information regarding the preparation of the use of UDAMED due to that, again, change in approach for the gradual rollout. Sharing some statistics here. This was actually taken as of the end of last year, where we were seeing some activity of what is in UDAMED production. So this is the production database. This is not UDAMED Playground. How many devices have been registered? How many UDIs, individual UDIs, have been registered within the UDAMED device module? We see, 98,000 for MDD, 76 for AIMDD, about 15,000 for IVDD, legacy IVDs, and a little over 20,000 for IVDRs. So we're getting close to 300,000 devices were already registered within UDAMED production. So these were, manufacturers that were, working along those lines of what we were hearing from France and Ireland and so forth, where they were encouraging its use. So these are kind of like the early adopters, which we expect the majority have been done through user interface data entry. I know this has been picking up from a machine-to-machine perspective. So I do expect that as we get further in a year, this number is going to be rising perhaps rapidly on the products that have been registered in UDAMED. Machine-to-machine had, as I mentioned, they developed the user interface functions first. A lot of larger companies looking for machine-to-machine to streamline the submissions. But they had quite a few hurdles to get through before that became operational. And it wasn't until really last year towards the end of last year, that this essentially the access point set up the technology mechanisms that's used to, it's AS4 technology utilized to perform the submissions from either your system to UDAMED or your third-party vendor's system to UDAMED on your behalf. All that technology had its ups and downs, but it became secure and ready for production, I would say, towards the end of last year. And since then, from our client base, we've had a handful of our clients that have been with us on this UDAMED journey for a while, finally start making some production submissions into the database. It started about around December, I'd say January timeframe. And that, again, that number's starting to ramp up. So we do expect to see some numbers spiking here as we lead into Q1 of January 2026. And look forward to seeing everything done, I guess, 6 months later. So again, it's not that big of a runway that you have or start and end time. So take advantage of what you can now, which leads me to that recommendation, essentially, right? Like keep the momentum going. So what is it that can be done? Considering where it is. Again, for the device module, it's really, if you're not manufacturing and selling contact lenses, then you're not really, at least our understanding is at this point, you're not really going to be impacted by the master UDI. So from that standpoint, you're pretty much the submission functionality, the UDAMED UDI module functionality that you need to be able to register your devices is pretty much there. There's going to be some updates and some tweaks. An example being, the Commission still has to do something when you're performing a machine-to-machine update to a very certain set of data that is a system procedure pack. So like there'll be like edge case stuff that is still in development, but the Commission's looking to knock that out in the next couple months. So I would say that the platform that you're submitting into for UDI has become much more stabilized. But with that said, things that can be done. number 1A or A here, collect and cleanse. This is definitely the most effort and longest time. Variable is the size of your inventory, how many devices that you have, but to really understand the data attributes that are being requested of you. The US implementation of UDI had some over 60 odd attributes, depending on your situation or the characteristics of the device. We're now with UDAMED with basic UDI, the UDI DI. Again, if you're a contact lens in the future, master UDI, like there's so many UDIs, it's wild. There's so many unique devices that are, but with master UDI, it's the attribute list is just growing, well over 110, 120, depending on your situation. So there's more data to be collected and captured, and some of which is brand new. So again, like the basic UDI, right? Like, so you technically should be creating basic UDIs now, but still it's new. You can't look at any other UDI implementation and be like, oh, what did we do here for that? Because you never had to do this before. You never had to have basic UDI submitted into any of these databases, especially in the manner in which the commission's requesting it. So, getting started with that is critical. And that note here about complying with the basic UDI creation deadline, there's a particular deadline in which time in which basic UDIs need to be created. I'm not saying necessarily submitted to UDAMED, but you have to prove that you do have basic UDIs assigned within your product inventory. But you definitely are able to take it to the next step, though, to make those submissions into UDAMED as well to get the registration complete. But before doing so, leveraging the playground environment. So submitting the playground. Again, we work mostly with machine-to-machine submitters, but this is also true for folks that will be using utilizing the user interface. We'll even work with organizations that use the user interface to help kind of guide them through it, because it's, we kind of indirectly get exposed to it a lot within the working groups we're in, and we use it ourselves for testing as part of the MedTech Europe working group. So we, gain some expertise within the UI of UDAMED itself within that module. Now, there's going to be a requirement, or there is a requirement, I believe it's documented well by the commission, that if you are going to submit machine to machine, you have to first obtain a playground account and perform test submissions. You're essentially proving to the commission that, okay, before you turn on these data exchange services for me in production, or before we turn these on for you in production, we want you to prove that you could actually make these submissions and make them accurately and so forth. Because if you're not really ready for it, if your XML's not meeting all the technical business rules of the UDAMED schema, it could be quite a mess. So they do require this test submission period where, we've gone through this about a dozen times at this point now, since, as I mentioned, in December, things became more stable with the machine-to-machine, and more folks began submitting and leveraging that capability. But we've gone through the submission to Playground, where essentially they just need to have some evidence of your setup in that Playground environment, whether you're using a third party such as LexisNexis ReadTech, or you're using your own homegrown UDAMED machine-to-machine submission solution. You just have to set up that access point in there to identify who are these submissions coming from. Perform. We have a list is about the different scenarios and some of the submissions to perform, and then capture the evidence and send that back to the commission, and they'll approve you to then transition you over to production. Very similar to what happens with US and US FDA Good ID. If you're setting up, if you're looking to submit to Good ID for the first time, or change the way you're submitting from manual entry to machine, you have to fulfill certain test cases and provide evidence to the FDA before they'll authorize the connection. And they don't, there's no way around that. There's no, here's a real world example where, we've submitted over 35% of the Good ID. LexisNexis Retech with our UDI solution. We still have to do that every single time a new customer comes on and they want to submit utilizing the Retech engine, and rightfully so from the FDA, right? Just because you're certified early, you got to continue to prove that this is the case. And we feel like this is also going to be the case with UDAMED, where you don't get kind of like a free pass because you're working with this particular third party that has done it for a while. We're expecting that even though it might be the same technology used, they're going to require this prior to anyone moving over to production. And also with these submissions, I'm speaking a little bit more from a technical implementation perspective, I suppose, but you can also think about your processes and everything too, right? Like you have to have all your SOPs in order and so forth on, first learn how you're collecting the data, then start documenting it, identify so it could be trainable, auditable, and relied upon the process that you identify for that collection. For the submissions in Playground, you get experience, like it's a very close replica of what's in production. So you could utilize that, make some submissions, play around with some scenarios ad hoc yourself, just to kind of wrap your mind around what that's going to be like. So you could guide into your internal processes and procedures to ensure that you're ready to roll once that Q1 2026 comes along. And then lastly, once all that's in order, of course, then you can start, submitting early in production and gain some traction towards the getting ready for that shorter registration period of 6 months. Now, I'm going to just kind of summarize a few things here to wrap up kind of the discussion from the UDAMED perspective before I jump into some other updates in some other regions. Adopt the now registration strategy. One is meeting that advanced compliance deadlines, right? The accelerated start date of January 1st, 2026, 19 months away, shortened submission period, just making sure everyone's connecting all these dots that, it's coming sooner, but you're also going to have less time to do it. So really, it's critical to do this. And I believe also the commission sees that. That's kind of part of why they're, turning up the volume, if you will, on their or the quantity of the communication and industry engagement. They're planning for more of that to occur, since these timelines are actually being pulled in. When towards the end of last year, folks might have went to holiday thinking, oh, I got much more time, I'm going to take the year off or something like that. But no, there's quite the opposite. Maintaining the momentum, continue that preparation of the process. So if you've already got started with some of those things I was referring to earlier, with like collecting your data or getting into Playground and doing some test submissions, just continue with that. Pausing that and then restarting. If anyone's experienced that many times, it just adds much more time to it to get it restarted. You don't want to lose resources that were you're relying on or leveraging for preparation and so forth due to any type of pause. Avoid the resource overload. This I look at a few different ways here, where there's timely completion of the prep allows you to be ready to focus on those submissions into other health authorities, right? So if, I'll talk about it in a second, Australia, we're expecting that regulation towards the end of this year. And that regulation is going to be more like the US implementation, where it's, you have, 1 year from the publication of this regulation to get your class 3 devices registered. TBD what it actually says. That's just me, as an example, but it will be in that regulation. It'll tell us the time that's the timeline, the mandated timeline. But there's other health authorities to compete with, right? So that you may need to be focusing on as they implement their UDI requirements, depending on where you're selling your products. But then also from a technical perspective, I think of resource overload as everyone from around the world who sells into Europe, like trying to submit their entire device inventory within a 6-month period of time. So with the US, it was phased based on risk class, right? So you weren't getting the whole entire industry of medical devices sent 1 year or for one timeline. It was this year, send high risk. Next year, okay, let's do implantables. But the commission's like, no, you got to get everything in there. You got 6 months to do it. So there is a lot of device information that's going to need to be submitted. And, we have voiced concerns about the ability for their systems to handle that, because we know FDA UDI crashed like the first month that went live with a smaller, volume of submissions, as I was just explaining. So if that's going to be magnified by a lot, we were recommending that we need to do some load testing. We need some coordinated load testing to ensure UDAMED doesn't accept device submissions on January 2nd and shut down January 3rd because we crashed the system. So there is activity going on there, which I'm happy to be able to say is happening, because, again, we've been talking about it for a while, but the commission actually just re-engaged us with the MedTech Europe and is coordinating some load testing submissions, which I applaud them for listening to us on and for us doing, because they don't want the egg on the face of the whole system crashing after it goes live. So when I see overload, that's what I'm thinking, but also from a human resource overload could be the case as well. So let's say the technical system doesn't work that well. If you're submitting earlier, you're not waiting till like the last month or so to submit, you could also minimize your risk of you're not going to be those, the last month folks that crash the system, perhaps, because we will do testing. We will identify what the performance is like, and perhaps, the commission might make some changes to their setup in order to increase that performance, but who knows? So maybe it's just slight improvement, and they still got to put some more boundaries in place as to how many devices can be submitted at a given time. That's what the FDA did. Satisfied early UDAMED, MDR, IVDR adopters. It's going back into what we were seeing with Germany and so forth, and Ireland and France, and then managing this complex UDI data set. So again, some of the statistics here I was referring to, about 111 attributes for device, about roughly twice as the US, many more different device types. It's a much more granularly structured data model that UDAMED has and requires, because it's leveraging, all these other modules for other business regulatory functions. So it's just much more complex than the US is the headline, but and that's real. There's different ways you have to do things based upon the types of devices you have, or what legislation it's under, if it's still MDD or if it has transitioned to MDR. So you don't want to be caught surprised by all that at the last minute. You want to get exposed to that, understand it as early as you can. This two-tier structure being referred to as basic UDI and UDI, that, again, that's one of those nuances that's in UDAMED only that, again, folks will not be used to. And these unique EU identifiers with the SRNs and EMDN, which is brand new, the European Medical Device Nomenclature for device type. So this would be like the equivalent of the GMDN, the Global Medical Device Nomenclature. So there's new things to get accustomed to be familiar with, and to bake into your processes. Look, we did have the process of high volume. The process of high volume, we have that covered. Complex machine-to-machine integration. So if you're looking to have your own solution and perform machine-to-machine, it's quite a development effort to get that running for UDAMED. Or if you're working with like a third party, such as LexisNexis ReadTech, you're more kind of along the journey with us as the development is getting completed. But that's another aspect that will take time, depending on which path you're taking. Ultimately decreasing the risk of falling out of compliance with that 6-month window that you're going to receive at the beginning of January 2026. If that's, you just don't want to, miss that. You don't want to be in a situation where this is getting into point 4 with the registration prerequisite for vigilance reporting. You just don't want to get in a situation within that 6-month period that you're falling behind, because I anticipate the commission. There's just so many downstream impacted pieces to that is not going to be something you can really hide under the radar with. and there are going to be some consequences there. Meeting the compliance for retention requirements. This is with the early UDI device registration, facilitating maintenance and retention requirements for 10 years and 15 years for implants after the product is no longer placed on the market. That still has to be provided and submitted into the system. All right. So I'm going to take a deep breath and a sip of water, and then we're going to go to Australia. So again, but it's kind of summarize it there. A lot going on with UDAMED. I understand this is a lot of information that I'm kind of throwing out there and going through. We're always happy to, have more in-depth specific conversations with anybody who wants to talk about this stuff, as we live and breathe it every day. So now moving on to Australia. What's going on here in Australia, right? So I mentioned there was a technical working group established about almost 2 years ago now, I feel like, with the TGA, where they sought out individuals and organizations that have experience with UDI implementation, whether in the US, in Europe, anywhere. So when that occurred, we joined this team, this technical working group team, and we're able to have interactions with the TGA technical team. So this has been a great breath of fresh air, I would say, in contrast to the last few years working on UDAMED. So there's this working group where you engage with the TGA, again, specifically the technical working group. I believe there is also more of a policy working group as well, but the technical team, we're focusing on the build out of their UDI database, the requirements to submit into that database and all that good stuff, the testing of it. And they are very, very receptive to feedback. They essentially were surveying what type of implementation would work best for the manufacturers and sponsors, which I was like, wow, that's a fantastic approach. It'll probably make it easier for us. So they landed on pretty much, I don't want to say copying, but their implementation is going to be very similar to the US. So if you've done US UDI, I'm not saying that you can just press an easy button and, Australia's done, but there will be less of these like things popping up that you've never experienced before, or learning a new standard. An example, the TGA is utilizing HL7 SPL. So the same HL7 schema that the FDA uses for the electronic submissions, TGA is going to be using, or they are using. We've participated in some pilot submissions to their test database using that. So they're not reinventing the wheel, which, I applaud them for, because I feel like that was kind of the point of UDI globally. Like, things may harmonize at a very high level, like, oh, we're doing this for these reasons, but how each country's doing it can be quite different. The extreme US versus, the EU, understand the dynamics are different, but it's a totally different implementation. With Australia, it's been fantastic where, things down to the data attributes, the data dictionary, again, the submission structure, it's all based off of, extending what's done for the US. So we'll certainly have new attributes, but a minimum set. We're expecting about 12 or 14 new attributes, in addition to attributes we already are familiar with due to the US implementation. So, of course, I'm talking about things like the ARTIG number and so forth, because clearly that wouldn't be in a US submission, FDA listing number would be and so forth. So I don't mean to say it's adding to the US. It's more like, okay, here were the US specific ones that were, US regulatory attributes. Here's the kind of equivalent for Australia, and kind of swapping those out. They're still just kind of finalizing that, that information, and they're, again, working on this final regulation. They had quite a few consultations put out where they were seeking input from industry, even on the regulation. And they've been digesting all that information and preparing for their final regulation. They're telling us they anticipate by the end of this year. So again, then once that happens, we within that regulation will tell. I would expect the production database to kind of launch around that same time of when the regulation gets released, production database goes, and it's like, all right, timer started, right? Like you have now a year and a half or 1 year to get your class 3 devices in, and they'll have some training and onboarding and so forth. But this this looks like this is quite far along with what we've seen in the working group, and anticipate this to once that regulation gets released, it's going to be pretty quickly rolled into implementation. I want to do an update on US FDA. Like clearly this has been achieved with all of the submission device types milestones. Those were all achieved. We still don't have contact lenses in the US database. I think they're kind of looking to see how it's going to work with Master UDI with Europe, to see perhaps if they implement a same approach in the US for the information. But one thing that is changing, that's actually bigger than UDI, that I wanted to call out here, because it impacts all electronic submissions that are made to the FDA, is their electronic submissions gateway upgrade. So for the US, I just wanted to touch on this just a little bit, and just an effort to spread awareness, because I feel like it's kind of been going under the radar in the industry a bit. Maybe I'm wrong, but just to be sure. So the FDA is planning to update their ESG. If you've ever used the electronic submissions gateway or familiar with it, there's a web trader option, which is like you log into it like a user interface, you browse to a file, upload it, submit to the FDA. You kind of have a nice little grid showing you, okay, they received it and received the submission results, the acknowledgments back in that UI. They also have AS2, which is for the machine-to-machine submissions, where it's more like folder structured transfer that is only used for machine-to-machine. So if you're doing high volume submissions, or if you're doing like ECTD submissions or anything that's very large, that's the method, or that's the flavor of the ESG utilized. Now, the FDA announced this initiative that they plan on creating ESG next gen, right? So they're going to be modernizing the interface, the tooling that's used for the ESG, and they're starting to communicate. Like, we are actually in a information webinar with the FDA 2 days ago, where they're still kind of like baking out their plans, but they do. We missed Q2 when they were expecting testing to begin, but it seems like in a few weeks, though, they want to open up some testing, at least with the updated user interface. So if that's something that you want to talk about in your organization, just to ensure, like, it might not be something you're directly working with, but like, hey, are we aware of the ESG being upgraded? Are we a part of that piloting team and so forth? It's a good thing to ask about, because just imagine, like, this is the only way you can make electronic submissions. So if you're not ready for when they transition, and they might transition the web UI version first, you just don't want to be caught when you have obviously a critical submission to make with, oops, we have the old version that doesn't work anymore, and actually go to the FDA. Within this webinar, there was a lot of information provided to the FDA about can you support both for a while, this, that. So of course the industry feedback's going to come in, but again, just aligning everyone on this call, just wanted to spread some awareness there that this is pretty impactful. The date and timing of when it's going to happen, it's a little hazy. It's a little bit more clear, I'd say, for the web interface. So if you're a web trader user, to get out there and look at it, we have the link here on the slide. This slide will show you, the evolving timeline that the FDA has for the implementation and the testing, and even some ways to get involved in the piloting. If you manage your own web trader account and perform your own ESG submissions, you can get yourself involved there to ensure your organization is prepared. Stay tuned. All right, so jumping over to down to Brazil. Brazil, we were anticipating essentially a formal announcement of a delay of implementation, and we did receive just that recently. So they're essentially pushing things out by a few years of what they were originally targeting for their UDI implementation and UDI regulation. So this is one that was kind of getting, there was anticipation that something might come out towards the end of last year, getting into this year. But, this is one that is kind of coasting back, but we just kind of wanted to provide that update. There's different links here in information areas as you receive the slides, or if you join like LexisNexis ReadTech's life sciences mailing list and so forth. There's links and stuff within these slides. We continuously provide updates into these areas as things change, but the change here has really been kind of a bit of a pause. Saudi Arabia, they're moving along with their their pilot. With their UDI implementation. They don't support that machine-to-machine bulk submissions. They only support manual entry within region. So you would have to be in Saudi Arabia keying this into the database, or Excel upload. And that Excel upload is only about like 100 devices at a time. So it is a pretty laborious process with Saudi. But just as awareness, if you're selling in this market, there are UDI requirements that are active and submission milestones ongoing. With Class A low risk, again, similar to a US implementation, Class A low risk, last wave expected to be submitted this September. China, this has evolved over the years as well. Started off with some piloting, but we're now in mandatory submission compliance timing territory. Example is there was a batch. They're breaking things up in batches as to when it needs to be submitted, and you'll get wind of some dates as to when it's going to be required, but it does change. So we're really unclear at the moment about the Class 1 and remaining devices as to what that final milestone is going to be. We're assuming 2026 because we noticed the change. We noticed the 2-year gap that started from batch 2 to batch 3. We're waiting on some more final confirmation on that. But they have their database for UDI registration in China does have the web entry, file upload, and machine-to-machine, so you can submit electronically to China. We've been doing that as far back as this all started, and that's kind of like no news is good news. It gets set up, it works. We don't notice as much change. I'd say once a year, maybe China does a few different updates on how that protocol works, but very pretty stable. And then lastly here, I believe is my last one here, is South Korea. So likewise, you have machine-to-machine capabilities here. You'll notice these compliance dates have all passed already for the UDI. There's also a track and trace component to this that in addition to the UDI registration. So if you're distributing product and selling product into South Korea, there's more to it than just your UDI device registration that would be required. Although this has been in place, as I said, since it shows here from July of 2019, and this I'd say is relatively stable as well. It's not like a UDAMED where they were launching a system with all these other regulatory modules for regulatory purposes. It's just UDI. It's kind of like the US. So a little bit more focused and I'd say straightforward. Of course, can't forget Switzerland. So the last here, then Switzerland. There's some piloting going on now with manufacturers only. I don't know if anyone on the call perhaps is participating in that, but they're piloting out their flavor of, like, they cannot use actual UDAMED as they're not formally a part of the European Union, but they're basing their implementation heavily off of UDAMED, and that makes my ears speak up big time. Like, okay, so yeah, how similar? What's the deal here? They're piloting some things now and expecting to expand that later this year with the actor and with the product module for UDI. I am not as confident there will be a product module launch in mid 2024 as we were previously, just based off of the way that we see things going. And I also think the impact that happened in the end of December, where, oh boy, UDAMED's so far away, and then it got brought in with the gradual transition rollout. I think they're kind of, okay, they have to react to that too, because they don't want it to be disruptive that you have Swiss submissions and UDAMED submissions all kind of hitting at that same time. Again, going back to that human resource overload where it's like, oh boy, you could have two implementations. This one may have crept up on some folks. Like, oh boy, there's going to be a Swiss DAMED and a UDAMED. It appears that way. So something else to keep an eye on, which we're monitoring and actually, throwing our hat in the ring for the technical piloting as well once that's ready. Towards the end here, what you have is just a little bit of like a cheat sheet. This is again one of my colleague Mr. Sainer's works of art that he has to update quite frequently when things change. But we also, we provide this information in all of our webinars, website, and so forth. Continuously keeping it updated, but this could be a nice little cheat sheet for folks who don't have something like this already. But as you can see, there's the current activity that was happening, a lot of future activity coming, and this is just from where there's grumblings and so forth. We know there'll be more than this, but this is quite a lot already. So with that, I was going to say thank you. And I guess we'll transition to any Q&A.
Yeah. Thank you so much, John. First of all, that was just like a masterclass in UDI happenings throughout the world. I have a feeling that these slides that we're going to send out, and yes, we are going to send them out. I'll reiterate that. Slides and recording to all of the attendees here today. I have a feeling these slides are going to be screenshotted, copy and pasted, used as a great resource for folks after this call. I know I'm going to use them that way. So thank you for just the dense information. It's really helpful. So in terms of questions, I see some good GIFs hitting the chat there. There are a bunch of questions in our Q&A. I wanted to just kick us off. It may not be the most upvoted question, but I think given how you described sort of the, I want to say urgency in getting started and gathering the data, particularly for EU, UDAMED, those, you said greater than 110, 111 elements at least. And those first steps you mentioned of gathering and cleansing the data. So this would be for maybe an audience member who's not started yet or is worried about getting started. The first question I wanted to ask was, and I think one of our audience members actually put a link in the chat. What's the best way to get access to that playground or test environment to start experimenting with this? What's that process look like?
Right. Yeah. So there's a, I see the actual link myself, but yeah, there is an EU resources UDAMED page, which would have a link to the UDAMED playground and production. Essentially what you have to do is anyone can access that link and search for stuff and so forth, but you're going to have to create an actor in the playground environment. You're going to need to have what they call, part of the expression, dummy SRNs. So it will not be your real, your actual SRN that you receive for live production, but they'll give you a test SRN, which then enables you to be this fictitious manufacturer within the playground. And it's, you identify someone as an admin within your account, and you could control the access. You can play, okay, I want to turn on the vigilance module. Let's see what's going on here. I want to turn on this module, that module. And, there's documentation on this site for all the different modules. There's a lot of information, but also stuff that there you go. Get started, the environments. Patrick put that within there. So
Patrick.
all that's there. And of course, any questions as that goes through, we'd be happy to help folks because it's very straightforward.
Yeah. Well, everybody check out Patrick's link that he posted in the chat if it's of interest to you. And thanks, John, for that answer. You mentioned this towards the end of your presentation, just about keeping up to date with all the sort of moving dates, the timeline. I mean, it's really good information. I feel like people are going to benefit from having that on hand. How do we stay up to date with what REIT is putting out? I mean, is there a newsletter, something we could subscribe to? Maybe that's going to be in the presentation, but I personally would just love to know how can I get the latest and greatest on the information you're sharing here?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. We have newsletters for our updates from medical device, our social media accounts with LinkedIn. We are very active with sharing information and even holding, joining. And again, thanks Greenlight Guru for having us here. But it's really an ongoing active thing that we're constantly putting out updates.
That's great.
Gary, my partner in crime, Gary, we joke at times that it's like whenever we're doing like a UDAMED update webinar, it's like we should wait until like 2 days before to do the slides because that'll be the latest and greatest. And all the last month, 2 months ago, it's obsolete. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. That's why I asked, just so we can stay sort of continuously up to date as these things move, because it sounds like a lot of moving pieces. So we'll follow you. Look for your newsletter. Okay. That's great. Thanks for that. Let's dive into some more specific questions that we have in the chat here. Let's see. There's a question about legacy MDD versus MDR, and I wonder if you'd feel comfortable fielding this one. So if you have, the question says, for a legacy device under MDD on the market in absence of MDR certification, if the devices are MDR certified this year, do they only need to be registered in the UDI or device module under MDR and not as legacy devices? Is that correct?
That one, I'd say that's been going. I don't know if that's been nailed down specifically. We know that there's dual registration requirements that are discussed, which that would be you're registering the MDD and then registering the MDR. But it might have to do with the vigilance module because when you're registering the MDR versus the MDD devices, your identifier, even if you have a GS1, G10 or a HIBIC code or what have you, you're not really registering that. You're creating a UDAMED ID and UDAMED DI within the database. So there might be scenarios where you have to do that in order to make UDAMED work.
Okay.
You'll notice there might be some things that might not make a lot of sense to manufacturers. And I would say it might be because I'd say the user community focused by UDAMED was competent authorities, notified bodies. Those were like they're pleasing, if you will. And then we all just have to adhere and submit into it.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Okay. Perfect. Well, this should be a quick question. It's about Australia. This is of interest to me because I used to deal with an Australian sponsor. Is it on the foreign manufacturer? So if you're a US-based company, maybe selling in Australia, is it on the foreign manufacturer or the Australian importer or sponsor to register in AUS or AUS, UDI, however we're pronouncing that?
Yes. That is also, I think, the top discussion point in the working group, both on technical and regulatory, and we're looking to see how that gets ironed out in the final regulation. I could say that at first they came out saying, well, either, you could kind of have an agreement to do it. And then as they were developing the database, they realized that there's certain information that only the sponsor would have access into an ARTIG. So that created a lot of discussion within the industry working group, a lot of feedback provided, but we don't know what they're going to come out with on how that's going to work definitively just yet. Just know that is a topic of uncertainty right now.
Right.
Because we even have manufacturers are foreign to Australia that they want to control it because they have global UDI data management programs in place. They don't want just like Australia to start flowing some other way. So they're trying to see, how do we work together? So you had like Medtronic presenting to TGA, J&J, others all giving their kind of like real world feedback, and they took it. They've been fantastic.
Oh, good. Okay. So that sounds like that one is kind of still under discussion at the moment. So thank you for adding the color to that. There's a question here. I'm going to skip down just a little bit. It's not the top voted right now, but I think it's relevant to getting set up in the playground. There's a question asked, is there a function for, correct and finalized data from the playground to transfer over to public UDAMED? So if people start experimenting, putting data into the virtual environment, is there a transfer function, or do you sort of have to redo all of that? How does that look?
Yeah. Well, there isn't. Like the quick answer is no. Like there's not a transfer function within UDAMED. This is your test data. It's not going to move to production. There's download functions of your data from UDAMED, though, since they make it so granular, the way that the submissions are structured and the way you get the data back, I'm not quite sure how useful that would be. With that said, when I was talking about SwissDomed, right? Like Switzerland doing their own thing. I was speaking to a client who is involved in the manufacturer-only pilot recently. It was like a few weeks ago. Guess what they expect as their submission format into SwissDomed? The download of your data from UDAMED.
Oh, nice.
So they were just kind of like, oh, that kind of sounds cool, but is this right? Like, is this going to work? So I don't know. Maybe, hopefully, we see some more just kind of like elevated thinking on how this stuff could work. Because, the goal is not to have to do this 35 times differently.
Right.
How to share. And that goes even from production to pre-production within UDAMED.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. I'll pose this question to you. I think it's not about data submission, so feel free to defer if it's not in your wheelhouse, but it is the most upvoted question. If you were to change the article number only and not the product, do you need a new UDI DI?
The article number. That I'd have to check against the data dictionary to see how it impacts that with the no change triggers, if you will, because there's a particular attribute. So I don't know that at the top of my head, but I have to go look at that. That's the source of truth. So the source of truth is going to be, what are the attributes that change that require you to submit a UDI?
Yeah, I thought that wasn't exactly on our topic for discussion.
If I had my other screen up here,
you could look at the resources. Okay, so Go find questioner, go find the source of truth, and it'll have your answer for you. But
or send me an email, and I'll help you with you afterwards.
Okay, great. Okay, next one. We submitted our Class 1 devices into UDAMED, and they were registered without any issues. Our Class 2B devices have been sitting and submitted for over 2 years. Any tips on how to get them progressed to registered? They are already MDR certified by the notified body. So sounds like some delays here in the process. Any insights why that might be? Change it?
Well, I know, I guess. So it's interesting you said that they were certified by the notified body, because it's the notified body that has to go into the certificate module and approve your submissions for those Class 2s. Like that's what takes it from the submitted state in UDAMED to registered for devices that have certificates. So the Class 1s that were like self-certified that didn't have certificates, they skip that step. So when you make that submission and it passes UDAMED checking everything's okay, goes right to registered. Ones with certificate data, it goes into this like queue waiting for your notified body to come in and review it and give it the okay. So if I haven't done so already, I would kind of kick the tires with the notified body and say, hey, you got remember that certification you gave us?
Notified bodies are maybe in a state of overwhelm. So
they might not even be ready to use UDAMED.
A little prompting to get that done. Oh, thank you. That's a great answer. Okay. You mentioned this along the way, and I think maybe you mentioned it in reference to contact lenses. This is something I have no idea about, but what is the master UDI? Is that only for contact lenses? I think that was a new term to some of us.
Yeah, currently, yes, only for contact lenses. So if anyone, was in US implementation for UDI, originally you were going to have to submit your contact lenses just like any other product. And then there was a lot of pushback on, whoa, we're talking like millions of records are going to be flowing in here. Is that really how you want to track it? That granular to like the shade of whatever the contact lens. So FDA just pulled out. They're like, okay, no contact lenses to be submitted until further notice or to be required. But the EU, they worked. It kind of seems like it was like created by the commission because then they had to bring it over or working with GS1 a bit, of course, to get that formally adopted as a standard. But Master UDI is going to be a way to, submit the information for more. I guess it's a group larger than the basic UDI because if you think about it, the basic UDI was kind of the similar devices under that same model, if you will. But now this is going to go up, I guess, even further. We're not expecting the data model to change that drastically. It might just be another attribute, and which attributes you send will be dependent upon that. But we're eagerly awaiting the playground update, which should be a month or two, where they're going to put Master UDI into playground. We're finally going to see it, and we're going to get access to test around, play around with it. So we'll definitely be having Master UDI sessions. H2 this year, big time, towards the end of this year. Information sessions, yeah.
Awesome. So if it applies to you, tune in. Stay tuned. Okay, great. Just want to give kind of a 2-minute warning until our time's up. John, are you okay to take another question? And then we'll take the last 30 seconds just to close out. But maybe another question real quick. Great. This is a question about GMDN versus EMDN. I saw a funny comment in the chat that said, yeah, EMDN is nice because it's free. So the question is, GMDN codes are often obsoleted. Does this happen with the EMDN as well? And how long do you have to update your registration in the event of those changes? So any comments there?
Yeah. So not sure yet with practical experience as to how often the EMDN will be updated and how much time you would have to make that change. I fully understand the comment on, you got to pay for GMDN and, that gets updated. And if you're out of sync, you're failing validation to the US and so forth. Make matters worse, in Australia, you put the GMDN in with your registration for your license and you never update it, but then they're going to ask for GMDN in your UDI submission. And so we asked them, how are you guys going to validate? Because it might be newer. But anyway, so no good real working details on the EMDN yet, other than it's, the commission's own. At one point, there was going to be some mapping from GMDN to EMDN, but that looks like that went away. So that's another thing I think we need to iron out a little bit better and have better communication of expectations.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, there's a couple more juicy questions here, but I think we are out of time. So folks, John, can I offer you up? They should get in contact with you or Reed directly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Connect with you. So thank you all for your attendance. And thank you, John, for leading us in this. Super helpful. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience did. The slides will be a wealth of information. So just wanted to thank you again for your time. We'll have to do another one of these. And have a good afternoon, everybody.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you to GreenLight Guru and everyone attending. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Bye, everybody.